You're listening to episode 131, Climbing Out of the Darkness to Reclaim Your Life, with Suzanne Ludlum. Welcome to the Grass Gets Greener podcast, the show for survivors by survivors. I'm your host, Melissa Wilson, a bullying survivor and anti-bullying advocate. And each week you'll hear from a survivor who has overcome a traumatic experience to go on to not only survive, but thrive, so that you can too, starting now. Hey there, welcome to this episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. And happy Memorial Day to you if you're listening to this on the day it's gone live. So today we're going to be joined by Suzanne Ludlum, certified yoga therapist and author of An Imperfect Pilgrim, Trauma and Healing on This Side of the Rainbow. Before we get into it, I do just want to mention that this episode is sponsored by Navni. Navni is the top-ranked anonymous writing website in the world. Navni provides free wellness resources and low-cost online therapy services to help people cope with various levels of emotional distress. Write anonymously, feel better at novni.com. So May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and Suzanne is here to raise awareness and talk about her struggle with depression and eventual rise above it that led her to becoming an advocate to those suffering as she once did. And in particular, Suzanne is going to talk about how she grew up in a dysfunctional home, but didn't really see it until she had moved out, and how she just suffered multiple devastating losses in her life, and how that deeply impacted her, and how she had lost her hope for healing at the age of 22, and she just felt so alone and isolated, and how she was also taken advantage of by a helping professional, and ultimately ended up suffering from a psychotic break. And then she's going to share her turning point with us, and then sadly how she ended up suffering another devastating loss as she was beginning to heal, and how being on her healing journey helped her get through it. And she's going to talk about the healing that she experienced doing yoga and what makes yoga so effective. We're going to talk about the dangers of being in constant fight or flight mode, and how we can use different tools to emotionally self-regulate, and the importance of reaching out for support when you feel isolated, and also the importance of reaching out if you think someone you know is struggling, and how Suzanne is now in a place that she never thought possible. So if you're looking for some hope that it is possible to get out of a dark place, to get to a place that you don't even think possible, then this episode is for you. And so without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get into it, and I'm going to go bring Suzanne on. Suzanne, welcome to the podcast, and thank you for joining me here today to share your story with us.
Thank you, Melissa. It's my pleasure.
Yeah, I'm happy to have you here. And, when I heard about your story and your message of hope, I definitely wanted to have you on the show. I know you've been on quite the journey, which you're going to share with us today. And now you're helping those who are suffering in silence to know that they are not alone and to never give up because help is available. And we'll also talk about your memoir, An Imperfect Pilgrim, Trauma and Healing on This Side of the Rainbow. So I'm excited to speak with you, Suzanne, and I know that your story is going to help someone who's listening today. And what I like to do is start with what you experienced growing up and then go from there. Does that sound okay to you?
Yes, that sounds like a good plan.
Great. So yeah, just kind of, share a summary with us of what happened and how old you were when it all began.
Well, I have to go pretty far back in time, but I do need to preface what I'm going to say by emphasizing that most of my trauma did not occur in early childhood that I know of. I think there are some body memories that I carry around that are void of cognitive memories, things that happened when I was much, much younger, pre-hippocampus development age. But I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about that.
Mm-hmm.
I will say that I pretty much grew up thinking my family was normal. And in a lot of ways, they were normal. Probably the biggest dysfunction was that I come from a long line of alcoholics. And My father, when I was in my early teens, quit drinking and started running, and he really turned his health around. My mother didn't. And I have a sister. I grew up with an older sister and a younger brother. They both became very, very heavy drinkers. In my older teens, I did a lot of that myself. I don't consider myself an alcoholic today. I'm just very well aware that that is a genetic issue and I need to be careful about my habits. But it really wasn't until I moved out when I was almost 19 that I saw the family dynamics as being as dysfunctional as they really were. And I began to mend my relationship with my parents when I was 20. But right about that time, my sister died very unexpectedly. She not only was her drinking a problem, but she was also anorexic and bulimic. And she tried to suppress her vomiting one night and suffocated on it. And so it was very sudden, very unexpected
Sorry
death.
to hear that.
And probably at that time, my mother crawled into the bottle and never came out. And a year after my sister was gone, my mom died very suddenly of a coronary. And that was, like I said, during the time where I was actively trying to mend the relationship and build the relationship with her. Because once I recognized the insanity that was going on in my house, I decided I was going to divorce my family, so to speak, and not really have much to do with them. And that's the main reason why I moved out so young. And that was pretty difficult for me. It was, in fact, it was devastating for me.
I can only imagine.
And 5 months after that, my dad died of cancer. And
Wow.
when my mom died, I knew my dad was sick, but I didn't think it was terminal. I just held out hope that he would be okay. And I was well on my way to mending my relationship with him. And then he was gone. And at that point, it was just my younger brother and me. And my brother was only 14. I was 21 at this point. So it was really just the two of us, and we were kind of lost in the world. And I went out west.
Did you have to to help take care of him at that point since he was so young?
I did. I tried to take care of him, but he, with his issues and with my issues, with our both of us just being thunderstruck over what had happened over the last 16 months, losing 3 members of our family, and just our grief buried us both. And he got into trouble at school. He got into trouble with the law. I had a nervous breakdown. It was pretty awful. And then he was sent to live with friends of my parents. They took him in to help him finish his high school years. And I was sort of left on my own. And I had gone out west. I had gotten involved with an organization that was not a good organization. It was actually a religious cult. I was forcibly taken out of that environment. That was another thing that was devastating to me because I had really bonded with these people. And shortly after I came back home, I was living in New Jersey at the time. It had been recommended to me to go see a psychiatrist who was known in the community for working with people who had been taken out of cults. And I saw him for a few months, and it was just never a good fit. I never learned the warning signs of danger. And so all of the knots in my stomach and the red flags that were flying were just, I ignored them. And one evening I went to his house for an appointment, and he had heavily medicated me. This is right after I was discharged from the hospital after my breakdown, and I was very heavily medicated. And I fell asleep on his sofa. I had asked to lay down for a few minutes, and I woke up and he was on top of me, pulling my clothes off, and he sexually assaulted me. And I think that at that point, I knew that any possible way of healing and getting help was virtually gone at that point.
How old were you at this time?
I was 22.
Okay.
I had just turned 22. So he knew my family was gone. He knew I just had a kid brother. He knew there was no one looking after me. He knew there was no one watching out for me. And he completely took advantage of that. And it was probably about 5 or 6 months after that that I had my first suicide attempt.
Mm.
And when I was in the hospital, he came to the hospital and sat by my bed and said, "You just didn't do it right."
Mm.
So to say I was lost in the world really is quite an understatement.
Right.
And I was sinking deeper and deeper into an abyss that I realized was unrecoverable, or at least I believed that at the time,
Mm-hmm.
that the darkness that I was finding myself in was unrecoverable, unimaginable. And I really don't know, looking back, how I survived day to day.
What did your day-to-day kind of look like at this time? I mean, were you able to function at all? Did you have a job, or were you did you have any relationships, or any involvement with friends and activities or anything of that nature?
The friends that I grew up with didn't. I think that when I started losing my family members and acting out just as a way of coping, they didn't understand it. They didn't know how to handle it, and they went away. They disappeared.
Mm.
Most of them did. The people who I had in my life as friends at that time didn't understand. And this is key, because they saw that I was struggling. They saw that there was something wrong with me, but they didn't know what to do. And so, out of good intention, they said, "It'll get better. You'll snap out of it. Things aren't really that bad." But the fact is, things really were that bad. But I was so deep into my abyss of existence that I couldn't explain how bad it felt. I couldn't explain or describe the pain that I was in.
Yeah, and it's hard. It's hard for someone who's not going through it to understand.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So you just felt really just alone at this point as well. Like you had no one that was there to support you.
Completely alone.
Mm.
Completely alone in the world. Completely isolated. Completely. And I did have a job, but I lost a lot of work time because I was in and out of the hospital several times at that point. And I had a very understanding boss, and so he helped me keep my job. He kind of covered for me so I could come back to work. My brother did eventually graduate high school, and he joined the Army, and I feel that that's really what saved him. So he spent 9 years in the Army. I started to try to pull myself out of the hole. I had a long-term boyfriend who also didn't understand, but tried to. And we eventually had a child together, and that relationship between him and me became, I'm not going to say dysfunctional. It was toxic. It was a very toxic relationship. And he kind of was in it for himself after a certain point and just did what he wanted to do with me. And I was too depressed, too weak from medication, and just too despondent and too hopeless to fight him off or to do anything about it. And I got away from the psychiatrist, and then I got away from this man, and began to rebuild my life. And I'm really giving you a very general overview of the time frame.
Mm-hmm, sure.
I was able to get another job. I was able to take care of my daughter. And I have to say that once I found a trusting therapist and I decided, okay, I really do need to be on medication, because I had quit all of the medication that the psychiatrist had given me. Much of it I didn't need. Much of it was unnecessary, but he was more or less a pill factory, and he thought I needed heart medication, so I took the heart medication. He thought I needed something else, so I took that. He thought I needed the sleeping pills, so I took that. I just did as he said because I never questioned his expertise. I never questioned his authority. So I just went along, and I was very compliant, even though what he was doing was extremely unhealthy and unreasonable. And I think at this point today, I look back and I think probably what he was doing was also illegal to some extent. And so I
So
found a
you
trusted.
were, yeah, and I was gonna say, I mean, so you were, obviously you're coming, from a very just dark and hopeless place. I mean, which, perfectly natural given everything that you had gone through and experienced. So yeah, so tell us about when things began to start turning for you and you started to be able to climb out of that.
Things began to start turning for me when I was in the hospital, and this was hospitalization number 8. And I had hit bottom, completely hit bottom. I had had a psychotic break. And later I learned that if you're, if someone is experiencing a clinical depression that is so severe that it can bring on a psychotic break. This is what I learned. There may be people out there who disagree with me, but this is what I learned in my healing journey. And in a way, that was reassuring to me, because when I realized that this was happening to me, I realized that there was something going on, that I was losing touch with reality, but it was out of my control. I had no control over it. I had no control over my behavior. I was having visual and auditory hallucinations. I was thinking that I was in Venice when I was really sitting in the psych emergency at the hospital. I thought my parents were alive and they were selling the house and not telling me. So I was upset about that. It was, to an outsider, it was really kind of messed up. But to me, it was reality. It was my reality from the inside.
Mm-hmm.
And so about 2 or 3 weeks into the hospitalization, I remember just sitting up in my bed and saying, I can't do this anymore. I can't go on like this anymore. I was stabilized on good medication at that point, so I could come to my senses to a point. And I realized that I have a young child who needs me, and I have a kid brother who needs me. And I grew up with a woman who was depressed, with a mother who was depressed, and I could not allow my daughter to grow up with a mother who was depressed, because I know the ramifications that it had on my life and the choices that I made as a result. And I could not allow that to happen, and to allow this dynamic to perpetuate itself into the next generation.
So
And
you had that fight in you and you wanted more. You wanted to be able to break that cycle.
I did. I needed to break the cycle. And so I made a concerted effort that day to do whatever I needed to do to get healthy. If I needed to take medication for the rest of my life, I would do that. If I needed to be in therapy for the rest of my life, I would do that. And I was subsequently discharged from the hospital. That was in July of that year. And in October, my brother took his own life. He committed suicide. And I truly didn't think I was going to survive that death. When my dad died, I looked at Joey, my brother, and I said to him, you and I are going to stick together. And he said, yeah, I know. I mean, he was grieving. He was a kid. And he couldn't do it in the end. His demons got the better of him, just like my demons had tried to get the better of me.
Wow.
And
So what happened to that? Did that set you back?
it did, in a way, but I was already on my healing journey. I was already in my upward trajectory. And
You were able to keep going and pushing through.
I was able to keep going. I was able to push through. I did fall into a very dark depression for probably a year. but not bad enough where I couldn't function. Because by then I had left my daughter's father. I had a house that I needed to take care of. I had a job. I had a mortgage on my own, and I had a young child. I couldn't afford to get sick again. I couldn't afford to fall apart again. I had way too much to lose at that point. And so I worked even harder in therapy with myself, on myself, developing close, trusted relationships, strong friendships, because my friends had become my family. My family was gone and my friends were my family. And so I developed close personal relationships with people in my life who I could trust and I could lean on if I needed to. And then
Yeah. And what other things helped as well?
well, about 4 years into my recovery, I decided that I was going to take a yoga class one day. And by this time, I had entered into my second marriage. I call my first marriage, it was really common law because we never technically married. So I just call it my first marriage just for convenience sake. But I had married a man a few years after that, and it was not a good decision. It was not a good relationship from the very beginning. And, by the time 3 weeks away from the wedding, I knew I was making a big mistake, but that's what you do. That's what a lot of people do is you get caught up in the momentum of planning your wedding. And by the time you realize, oh, I shouldn't be marrying this person, you don't want to cancel the catering hall. You don't want to cancel the caterer. Let me say something to the women out there who are considering maybe they're not marrying the right person. Don't do it.
Mm-hmm.
Don't do it. I don't regret it because I got my second daughter out of it, and she is just the love of my life. She's a wonderful, wonderful person. Both my daughters are just wonderful people today. However, when I was new in the second marriage, it was just a few months old, and I was already lonely, and I was already regretting it. And so I just decided one Saturday morning, let me go check out this yoga class. And I was not really interested in yoga. I wasn't aware of yoga and its healing powers or its healing modalities. I wanted to go because I needed an outlet for my stress. I wanted something physical. I was looking for a new form of exercise. So I went to this class, and it was an hour and a half of sweating and grunting and stretching and strength. And it was just incredible. It wiped me out. And I left the class and I sat in my car and I was like, okay, something feels different. And it felt like something was missing. And I sat for a few minutes more and I realized that what was missing was my anger.
Mm.
Because I had recovered, I had healed from the depression well enough to be functioning. But really what it left in its wake was a lot of anger and a lot of rage. I call it, in the book, I call it a firestorm of fury. And that became my default emotion. Anger became my default emotion. But I didn't feel it that morning in the car. And I got very curious and said, okay, let me go back on Tuesday for another yoga class and see if I feel the same way afterwards.
Right.
And I did. And I was hooked at that point.
Mm.
And so I had developed a regular yoga practice. Another really profound thing that yoga and adopting a yoga practice did for me was it cured me of the panic disorder that had developed when I was 12 years old.
Wow.
And it was a very debilitating disorder that defined the jobs that I would take, the situations I would find myself in. And I had tried a lot of other modalities like biofeedback, talk therapy, and nothing really seemed to help. So I had kind of given up on ever overcoming the panic attacks. And a year into my yoga practice, they disappeared. They were gone, and I never got them back again. And so I decided at that time I need to study yoga more.
Yeah, and I know. I mean, yoga, helps a lot of people. What is it about it, do you think, that makes it so effective?
There's a lot about it. There's, first of all, body awareness. You start to become more aware of how you're carrying yourself. Me, I was imploded physically. My shoulders were hunched, my chest was caved in, And that exacerbated the panic attacks because I couldn't get a full breath in. You learn to breathe. You learn to open up spaces in your body so you can accept a full breath in. And breathing being a huge component of a yoga practice, I learned that just taking a deep breath, and especially a long exhale, can take you from sympathetic state to parasympathetic state. And what I mean by that is when you're in a sympathetic state, you're in that physiologic fight or flight state where your cortisol levels are raised, your adrenaline is raised, your heart's beating, your glucose is being secreted into your bloodstream so you can run, give you energy. And parasympathetic is essentially the opposite. It's the rest and relaxation, where you have your cortisol levels go down, you feel more relaxed, you feel calmer. And so that's
and that's where you want to be if you're not in danger, because it's not healthy to be in that fight or flight response mode all the time.
You're right. And you're exactly right in that it's not a healthy place to be all the time. Stress is not bad for us. Stress helped us survive. Stress still helps us survive. If I'm walking down a dark street at night and I hear footsteps behind me and they start getting faster and I think I'm going to be jumped, you bet I want that cortisol streaming through my bloodstream and I want the adrenaline going because I want to be able to run, because I want to be able to escape my attacker. But the problem comes when we're in that chronic state, that chronic sympathetic state.
Yeah, we're just trying to get through our daily activities and it's there.
Right. Because that can wreak havoc on your constitution long term. That could have negative effects on your immunity, on your sense of well-being. It shortens your telomeres, which are the little end caps on the ends of your DNA strands. And if you have shortened telomeres, that translates to shorter lifespan. So there's a lot involved in wanting to have a healthy stress level when it's needed, but to have a healthy relaxation state for the rest of the time.
And so you had done yoga for a year, you said, and then you found that it had significantly helped you in that area. So
it did, yeah.
Yeah. How regularly were you doing the yoga?
I was going to classes 3 times a week, and then I was starting to develop a little bit of a home practice. I wasn't confident by then to really know what I was doing at home. But yes, 3 times a week, diligently. And then when I began in year 5, I had begun a yoga teacher training. So I was practicing yoga a lot more than 3 times a week. It was almost every day. And I should say that I also had a meditation practice that was consistent for a while. When I was 16, long before yoga ever came into my life, I had taken a training in transcendental meditation. I had gotten my mantra. I had sat for 20 minutes a day, twice a day. I was a very devoted practitioner. But then after all the tragedies started happening in my life and the depression came on and that consumed me, I gave up my meditation practice. And then years later, and especially when I started the teacher training, I rededicated myself to the meditation as well. And it still comes and goes, but I have a more consistent practice today than I did, way back when.
Is there a certain amount of time that someone needs to do yoga for it to be beneficial, or, a certain number of times a week or something like that?
Well, what I tell my clients is, how much time do you have realistically every day to devote to a yoga practice? And then I give them a practice that's based on their needs, based on their limitations, their physical limitations and their physical abilities, and based on the goals that they want, that they state when they first come to see me. I give them a practice that fits within that time frame that they can reasonably allow. Because
okay, so it's just going to depend on the person's needs and what their schedule is like.
Yes, everybody is different. If someone only has 5 minutes a day, or say 5 minutes in the morning and 5 minutes at night, and their goal, the reason they came to see me is because they want to reduce their anxiety, I'll give them a breathing practice that they could do 5 minutes in the morning and 5 minutes at night, or even do it for 2 minutes in the morning, 2 minutes at night, and then fill the rest of the time with perhaps a body scanning or a little bit of somatic movement where they can really feel how their body is moving through space. So that's called proprioception, is us being able to feel how and where our bodies are moving in space. Interoception means how people can feel the internal sensations going on. And people who have mental health issues, whether it's trauma, depression, anxiety, or any other host of mental health issues, are compromised in their ability to experience proprioception and interoception. So having a yoga practice and a mindful practice will help rebuild those abilities.
Gotcha.
And I do want to just stress that, unfortunately, Western culture has diluted what a lot of traditional yoga practices started out as being into an exercise routine. And yoga, when I talk about yoga, I'm really talking about not just the physical postures or the somatic movement, but I'm talking about the mindfulness, the meditation, the breathing, the self-inquiry, the cultivating loving kindness, cultivating compassion towards others and towards oneself. And that's really important because when we have depression, when we have anxiety, we're our worst judges and we're our worst enemies, and we really get down on ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
When I was going through my worst depression, the stories that my mind told me were, you're sick, you're messed up, you're never going to get any better. Why are you even here? Why are you even alive? And those are the
these
stories
things that are going to keep us stuck.
Right. Those are the stories of the conditioned self.
Mm-hmm.
But through the mind-body practices, we can learn to meet the voice and the stories of the true self, the voice of the true self, and who we are underneath all of those stories, and who we are underneath those beliefs that we've come to have about ourselves based on either our diagnosis or what people tell us, or even what we learn to tell ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's really great to hear about, how yoga has helped you so much. Is that like the one thing that has had the biggest impact in your healing?
I start out when I give presentations by saying, yoga didn't cure me, Prozac cured me. And that usually gets a laugh, but it really is true, because I don't want people to think, well, I'm just going to start a yoga practice and I can ditch my medication, because I would never advise anyone to stop taking their medication.
Right, of course.
Yeah. I'm going to say that traditional modalities like psychotherapy and medication helped raise me to a level where I could function and function really well. But the mind-body practices, the yoga practices that I have in my life today, they keep me going. They sustain me. I don't even consider myself cured, so to speak, because from time to time, depression will rear its ugly head. Anxiety will try to get the better of me. I still suffer from anxiety. I still live with anxiety. I'm not even going to say it's suffering, because I now have the tools, the mind-body tools that I can draw upon to emotionally self-regulate, to take myself from a sympathetic to a parasympathetic state. If I feel that depression is starting to take over, I'll say to that voice, this is depression. This is the voice of depression talking. This is not who I really am. You're not welcome here. I'll get back on my yoga mat. I'll get out of my head and I'll get back into my body by moving, by doing some sun salutations, by doing some twists, by doing some cat-cows, by just moving my body and feeling how my body is moving in space, by developing and recultivating that sense of proprioception. And that's
go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's it's a very powerful practice, and it's very therapeutic.
Yeah, and I think, it's so important to just have the awareness and to have the tools that you can turn to that can help you.
Right.
So and if someone, if they need medication, then that's fine. And of course they need to, just be working with their doctor on what's best for them. And I think it's also just great to have all these other tools as well that you can just kind of have there in your back pocket, if you will, that you can turn to when you're experiencing some of this stuff, and you can use to help you to get out of it and to feel better.
Exactly. And my tools are not necessarily what might work for someone else.
Mm-hmm.
This was my journey. I really try to stress to people that if mind body practices are not your thing, find something that is your thing. Other tools that are very valuable, one in particular, is talk about your depression. Talk about what is bothering you. Talk about it. Let's get the conversation started. People live too much. They live in isolation. And there's still, after all of these years, after all of the press and the media about depression and anxiety and trauma, which has become a buzzword in our culture, there's still a huge stigma attached to mental illness. There's still a lot of shame and a lot of isolation surrounding mental illness. But once we can start talking about it, that's how the healing begins. Having a sense of community, even if it's with one trusted person. If there's one person in your life you can call and say, I just need you to come and hold space for me. I just need you to sit with me while I cry this out. I just need to tell you how I'm feeling. Can you be there for me? Can you come and be with me just for a couple of hours? And that person can come and be with you for a couple of hours. Sometimes that's all it takes for you to start to feel better.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to be like, okay, Mo Betta, I'm totally healed. I'm totally cured.
Right.
But sometimes that's
it
all
can
it
go
takes
a long way.
to take the edge off.
Right. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And that's why, I love to hear about what's helped my guests, because you never know, what might help the listeners. And certainly there's so many different things that you can try, different tools available now. So I love to just hear about the different things and, how they've helped people and just so others are aware of what their options are.
Right. And, I use all of those tools. I've got friends I can call and say, hey, let's get together. If I feel like I've been alone too much, if I start to feel like I'm getting a little isolated. And by the way, I do want to say that I'm in what's now I consider my third and best marriage. So, I've got a very loving, very compassionate, very understanding husband, and he's the love of my life.
That's great.
He travels a lot. I work from my home, so I am alone quite a bit. And if I
easy to feel isolated.
It's very easy to feel isolated. And so if I do start to feel like, ooh, okay, I'm alone a little too often now, I'll call up a friend and say, let's do lunch. Let's meet for coffee. Come on over. Let's go down by the lake, whatever. Just as long as I'm with someone, and someone who I trust, who can hold space for me, someone who knows my story. They don't have to have any answers. And that's the thing is, please don't be afraid to ask someone, are you okay? Can I help you? Are you suffering? Are you hurting? Because you don't have to have any answer. You just need to ask the question. And depression is not contagious. Sure, there's a genetic predisposition in family lineages, but from friend to friend or person to person, depression isn't contagious. If you ask someone, are you feeling depressed? That doesn't mean that you're going to catch it. But it will mean to that person that you recognize that they're suffering. And that's a door that's opening to them to start to talk about it, to feel like there's hope. Because you have to feel that there's hope. And I lived without hope for many, many, many years. And for some reason, I call it sheer determination. I also call it the grace of God. When I gave up on myself, the hand of God reached down and said, I will pull you out. I will help you. And that's also a tool, is having, for me, that's also one of my tools, is having a personal relationship with a higher power.
Mm-hmm. So, Suzanne, how would you say that you're doing overall today?
I think, relatively speaking, I'm doing pretty terrific.
That's great.
I have a wonderful life. I have a wonderful family. I'm in a place in my life where I never imagined would be possible for me when I was in my darkness. And that's really the reason why I wrote the book, because I wanted people to go through my journey with me through reading the story and say, well, if she can be in that level of darkness and make her way out to have a thriving life, maybe I can too. It really was a message in a bottle. It was a message of hope. And I offer gratitude every day. I give thanks every day for having everything that I do in my life, and for having the people that I have in my life, not just my family, but my wonderful, wonderful friends who are my extended family.
Yeah, that's a tool that helps me, whenever I feel like maybe I'm getting in my head a little too much, just to focus on what I'm grateful for. It helps to get me into a better state of mind.
Right.
So, well, that's great. And in your book, I mean, you go into more detail about your story, right? And just so if anyone is resonating with what they're hearing here and they want to hear more about it, then they should definitely check out your book, right?
Right. Yeah, I go into a lot more detail. Yeah, there's a lot more covered in the book.
Great.
It really
Yeah.
is it really is a journey that people go on when they read it.
Great. Yeah. So that'll be linked up on the show notes page for anyone who wants to hear more, to read more. So, Suzanne, tell us, more about what it is that you do today.
I'm a certified yoga therapist. I received my master's degree in yoga therapy a couple of years ago from Maryland University of Integrative Health. As far as I know, it's the only university, the only institution of higher learning in the country that offers a master's degree in yoga therapy. And it's a wonderful program. I'm very grateful for it. I've actually been a practicing yoga therapist for about 10 years. And like I said, I have a private practice. I work out of my home. I've got a dedicated office and yoga room and reception area in my home. So it's welcoming and it's private. And I work primarily with people who have mental health issues, whether it's trauma or depression or anxiety. I also see clients who have low back pain, osteoporosis, um, autoimmune disease, several clients who have MS. And there's a mental health tie-in to a lot of those conditions that I just mentioned, because, when we're in physical pain, it can cause a lot of depression and stress. So it's all tied together. And that's primarily what I do. I also am an advocate for suicide prevention. I'm a public speaker, and I present at conferences on trauma, and I'm integrating therapeutic yoga into mental health care. In fact, I'm leaving in 2 days to go to Florence in Italy to offer a CEU course to mental health and yoga professionals on integrating yoga and therapeutic yoga into the mental health care setting. So
Nice.
there's going to be it's actually happening. There's a blending of the two fields, because traditional talk therapy is wonderful. It has been extremely valuable to me. It's extremely valuable to many, many people. However, when we have trauma, the trauma lives in our bodies. And so if we can teach clinicians how to integrate some of the somatic aspects and some of the mindful aspects of what we do into their setting, it can only help their clients that much more.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Yeah, I'm sure that the work you're doing is helping many people. So I want to ask you the final question that I have for you, and that is, given what you know now, if you could go back to when you were going through your tough times and give yourself one piece of advice, what would it be?
Just one. Wow, that's tough, because I've got a lot of advice for my younger self. I would say, trust my gut. Trust my gut. if there's danger ahead and you feel it, but your mind is telling you, oh, no, it's okay. No, it's not okay. That's the interoception I'm talking about. If you've got those butterflies in your stomach when you're approaching someone or someone's approaching you, you have to listen to it. If you go to see a therapist and something just doesn't feel right, that means something's not right. Turn around and find someone else, find someone you trust. I need to throw in one more piece of advice that I would give my younger self, and that is, please don't stay isolated. There is no shame in asking for help, and there is no shame in feeling the way you're feeling. Tell someone, find someone you can trust. Say, I'm hurting. I just need a friend. Start talking about it, because when you can start talking about your pain, that's when you start healing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think those two pieces of advice are so important. So yeah, thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
And before I let you go, what is the best way that people can connect with you or find out more about what you have going on?
Well, they can go to my website, and that's www.trinityyogatherapy.com. They could also go to the book website, which I think you're putting a link up on your website, but that's www.animperfectpilgrim.com. You can also find me on Facebook on Trinity Yoga Therapy. You can find me on LinkedIn under my name, Suzanne Ludlum. You can also give me a call, 540-841-2790. I'm on the East Coast. And I think those are the best ways. Email, you can reach me through email at Suzanne@trinityyogatherapy.com, but you can also contact me through my website.
Okay, yeah, that sounds good. Thank you for all of that. And definitely we'll have that linked up. And so, yeah, just want to thank you for coming on today and for sharing your story with us and your message of hope and healing. And I think that, it's going to help those that are listening. So thank you.
You're welcome. And thank you for the opportunity. I really feel that we need to start talking about these issues a lot more. So thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Melissa. You too.
Thanks for listening to the show today. This has been the Grass Gets Greener podcast, episode 131. Go to thegrassgetsgreener.com/Suzanne Ludlum to find the links mentioned during this episode or to leave a comment. So I hope that you enjoyed this episode today. And what really stuck out for me was just Suzanne's willingness to fight for her life and climb out of that dark place and not give up. And if you're someone who's there right now, if you're in a dark place, I want you to look for some reason to fight and something that you can hang on to. And I know that, it's not easy. I'm not saying that it's, going to be easy to climb out of that. But use that to guide you. And most importantly, reach out for help because you deserve that. So I hope that you've been, inspired and feel hopeful after hearing Suzanne's story today. And come back in 2 weeks for the next episode. And also head over to the website to grab your free copy of the Top 10 Strategies Guide for Survivors. In it, you'll find the top 10 most common strategies my podcast guests have used for overcoming the effects of past trauma. It's a great place to get started if you're looking for some strategies that can help you in your healing, as they have helped my guests. And you can find that at thegrassgetsgreener.com/guide or also on the show notes page. So be sure to grab that if you haven't yet. And lastly, don't forget to head over to iTunes or Stitcher to leave the show a rating and review so that we can reach as many survivors as possible. And as always, have hope.